Yesterday, in a development session that we did off camera, we worked on, first of all, ingesting the commercial and manufacturing zones. So we now have residential, commercial, and manufacturing, all of the primary zone types in New York. We have them all kind of spelled out here, and we have a view function which it doesn't show all of the attributes, it shows all of the non-zero attributes for each zone. And for commercial zones, they have this equivalent residential zone, so you can click on that and see what the parameters are for a residential project that would take place within that zone. Then we use the Pluto data to make this association between lots and the zones that they're in. And we have these scoped links which will lead to a list of all the lots which are in that zone. And then if I look at that lot, it will say which zones it's in. I can then click on that to see the basic data here. And I also added some things like these rows are now links. So if I click this, I will see all the lots in Brooklyn. If I click one of these, I will see all the lots on that block. This is pretty cool that I have, okay, so this is West Street. I have all the lots on this street. So what I can do is kind of like go to a block. Whoops. That's actually the lot that I clicked on. I can go to a block, and then I can go to that street, and I can see all the lots on that street. So these are some somewhat useful admin side navigational tools that we added yesterday. Another thing that I did yesterday was I was able to improve this address search. So let's see, we obviously have 195 Charles. So currently a majority of our lots still do not have good data in this street address format, but 195 Charles, I'll see if our search can find that. 195 Charles Street. Okay, got it. We did a little research on adding maps to this display. We didn't get that to work yet, so we'll revisit that later. But for right now, what we are going to do is actually start adding a front-end user interface. So we're going to start making the new architect account and start designing the beginning of the interface that architects will use to peruse and purchase our data. Okay, so just like we use for our admin authentication, we are going to use Devise for architects. So I think all we need to do right now is just give it a word. So let's say Rails G Devise architect. Okay, great. Before I run this migration, I'm going to go edit it to include some of the data that we are going to want to store about our customers. Okay, so we are going to use confirmable first of all. let's see, we don't need really lockable, or at least we don't need it right now. We can always add it later. This is some fun metadata to use, and obviously resetting passwords is something that people have to do on a daily, if not hourly basis. So okay, so this is a little bit of a question mark because we might want to allow people to store more than one phone number, especially because this is kind of a very professional service that we're offering, but that is something that we can revisit later. And even at that time when we do revisit it, it probably won't hurt to have one phone number which is kind of a primary phone number. So let's not take that too hard right now. Okay, we have email, phone number. We can say business address. Let's see, that would best be stored in another table probably. Business name. Yeah, we should probably allow one line for business name. And while we're at it, we can probably give them one line for their business address. I mean, we don't probably need to do any sort of calculation or analysis of people's business address. It is likely that we will be able to use it in a format which is basically just human readable. And if we come up with a feature set that requires us to have a machine readable business address for our architect customers, then we can revisit that when we find that. Okay, so first name, last name, phone number, business name, business address. It might be useful for us to know things like years in the industry or their job title, perhaps. Yeah, I'll just put job title. These are all details that are basically going to be useful for us to help our clients present themselves as professionals. These fields are not probably going to really impact anything that our application does, except for just A, making it feel really professional for our customer, and B, it will give us a clearer path to rolling out features that help them present things to other people. Okay. I think that's good for right now. Well, actually, the other thing that we might want to store is their payment credentials. We can add that in a moment, but I think I'll just go ahead and add it right now. So let's say t.string. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that we're going to use Stripe because it's the best thing to use.
I have a PayPal.
PayPal's good, but Stripe, I think, is in many ways quite a lot better. And if we don't use it, we can change it. So, great. I'm going to run the migration.
There's something that we should. Does Stripe interface with Salesforce?
I imagine it does. I don't know, but they're both the biggest players in the game, so. Unless they have some kind of vendetta against each other, I'm sure that they're doing everything they can to work together.
I have tons of manuals on Salesforce. A whole box of them right here.
Yeah, Salesforce is an interesting company. I would love to learn a little bit more about their stack.
I've got all the manuals here from the top here.
Okay, well, start reading.
I know. It's too much to know.
Okay, so we have a table of store architects. What we need now, because having done that, Devise has already created all of the forms that we need to allow people to actually log in and sign up and confirm their email and so on. What we need now is an actual homepage for them to land on when they visit the site. And this step is actually something that has caused me a little bit of confusion in the past, because the question is like, what do you name this controller? Do you call it the home controller? What do you call it? Architect controller, as though they were to land on their own profile, which is sometimes a good paradigm. But they're not going to land on their own profile before they've logged in. So we could consider it like the new page, like the new architect page. Another paradigm we could consider is like making it kind of like a sales letter, saying like, here are some cool reasons why you are so interested in becoming our customer. That paradigm frequently hinges on a bunch of static content, so there's not really as much actual Rails activity for those pages, and they're sometimes actually served in a way that bypasses the Rails application for the purposes of making it as quick as possible. But I think what we want to do is just come up with a name that we're comfortable with and make a controller, and then we'll start making the templates, and we'll just keep it all right within Rails for the time being. So let's see what we can come up with. Rails G controller. We could say home controller, but I want something more sexy. Sales letter, introduction, entryway. How about entry? That's like a nice building metaphor, right?
Yes.
Entry controller. That sounds pretty good, and it's very sexy. Because when you have sex with them, you enter them. Entry controller. And it's also got this sort of like space age, like re-entry. We're ready for re-entry. You have been granted entry to zoner.
Yeah.
You are entering the zone.
What is the? I'm trying to narthex. Why don't we call it the narthex? Because that's sort of the entrance into. Hold on, is that the correct term? I'm trying to remember the gateway to a. What am I doing here? I need to do that.
I think if it's that obscure, it's maybe not.
I don't know.
Here,
I'm
I'll
just having fun here.
send you the browser.
Yeah, that's what is that too obscure? I'm trying to just remember what the name of this is. Report. A distinctive area of the western entrance. Yeah, this is kind of cool. This is like, when you enter into the church, you enter right here at the narthex, I think. You enter at the beginning. You know what I mean? It's kind of an entrance.
That is a cool metaphor.
Right here. You enter, like, Notre Dame in Paris, it's pretty amazing entrance, Whatever.
That's it. I'm really glad that you thought of that,
It's kind of fun.
but I still like my idea better. Even though architects love churches.
Well, I'm just thinking of a more specific entrance. We want to bring them in, right?
Yes, and churches are not really in style right now.
No, we can use that as a metaphor.
No offense.
You're right.
No offense.
Church, whatever.
The church is making a comeback, and I'm sure will be with us for forever. Okay, entry controller. Woohoo! Entry controller.
Let's call it Northeast. It's just too good.
Okay, fine. We will. There it is. And then what we can say is in our roots. Let's see, do we have a root yet? There we go. Bye-bye. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this because sometimes I do that. Ooh, device for architects. That's already... Oh, because I just generated that. Perfect.
So when you generate it, it adds sometimes code to the roots?
Yeah, so generators can add code to files. Usually generators just create new files, but there are a few cases where they will edit a file that you already have. And that is a good indicator of how powerful generators can be. I mean, sometimes people badmouth them, but that's only because they haven't learned to use them to their full capability. So, let us, okay, we don't actually need any code here. I don't think. So let's go ahead and just start making a template.
Okay. I like it. It's very exciting, Mike.
Okay, so now it is an occasion for us to make a few decisions. Like so there are different templating languages which are available to us. ERB is kind of the default, and it is actually a templating language that I have used for many of the projects that I have worked on, and I have not I personally have not found that Haml is necessarily a better templating language. There are some really great things that Haml can provide, and Haml is a very active project, and it's a very popular one with good reason. The way that it uses indentation, I find, can be a hindrance for pages that are longer than a few lines, but there's also something to be said for a system that encourages you to modularize things so that they do not get to be super long individual pages. In fact, I have often felt that the way that Ruby allows you to avoid parentheses is a really good sort of nudge in the direction of writing code that is broken up into the pieces that are the right size. And Haml does exactly the same thing. It'll
use the semicolons and from the JavaScript.
Yeah, that's in the same vein as well. Yeah, moving things onto different lines so that they don't get too close to each other, and they don't kind of reach the level of complexity that slows down your comprehension. For right now, we can stick with ERB. The next decision we're going to make is our style sheet framework, and we are planning to use Zurb Foundation for that. So for now, let's start with a login link or a sign-up link. And now that we have devise set up for architects, we can have new architect registration path. So since we're using Devise for both architects and admins, Devise templates, it can handle both, but we're going to want to customize them each. So we'll have to figure out exactly what the best way to do that is. But anyway, for now, we're keeping it simple. New architect registration path. Sign in. And then that, I believe, is called new architect session path. Okay. And then I think I just say architect. Okay, destroy architect session path. Okay. So if I log out as owner, I now have this new page here. And see it says architects here, so we know that we're signing up to be an architect. And I'm going to write my email. I'll just use my fake password since this is a development database. Okay, signed up successfully. It sent me a confirmation email. Let's see, maybe I didn't turn on confirmable yet. Probably not. So I go to the architect, can turn on confirmable, and then just for consistency's sake, I'll take it out of this list. And that actually might cause a little hiccup for me because I was never sent a confirmation token, but I was also never actually confirmed. Okay, so it said invalid email and password. Let me make sure that I have this written the way I think I do. All right, well, let's jump into the console. See if that helps. Didn't. So let's say this is how you manually update someone's password via the console. So now I can go. Okay, it still did not let me log in. Cool. So I have confirmed, I have email. have a password here, encrypted one. What is going on with my login attempt? Unauthorized. Sessions controller create. Okay. Gonna take a look at my device configuration file.
Confirmable is false.
You mean reconfirmable?
I think you just said confirmable. Well,
This one?
oh, you're right, reconfirmable.
Okay, I'm gonna restart the web server, which normally is not necessary, but just because Devise is such a sort of complicated subsystem, there may be some kind of a interaction with who knows what. Okay, now I'm in. I wonder what that was all about. Okay, so we have two Devise scopes, admin and architect, and that has some complexities which we will have to make decisions about. Like, for example, when you log out of one, does it log you out of the other?
And there should be two layers of
When you log into one, does it log you into the other? Now, I think that use is...
There should be two layers to the architect also, because we want to provide some demonstration, some opportunity for customers to browse the services that we could generate.
Sure. Okay, so we will need to kind of be able to acknowledge the situation that there's multiple sort of payment statuses for an architect's account. I'm going to go ahead and create a way for the architect to enter their information, their bio. Okay, so we have this sign up, we have login, and I believe we have log out. Yeah, we do. Just going to assume that works. If it doesn't, we can just reject it.
Actually, there should be several tiers of architects status.
Yep.
We'll talk about
Good.
that later.
Okay, so now I'm going to create an architect's controller.
Exciting.
Okay, so I was expecting it to actually pluralize that for me.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't. So I think I could go in and rename these files, but I think what I'm actually going to do is do this.
Interesting.
And now I just cut the files I just created. I'll pluralize it myself. I guess the reason why it has that behavior is because there are some situations where you do want a controller that's singular. Like if you have a concept in your application which is not plural. I'm not sure if I can think of a great example off the top of my head.
what we talked about a little earlier today, creating a system for an architect to take notes as he moves through the city.
Yeah, but the notes are still plural.
Okay.
Location, maybe? No, location is probably still plural. It's like, yeah, I can't. I'll try to think of an example, but I can't do one right now. So architect's controller, this is going to be basically a RESTful controller similar to this, you know, that has the 7 RESTful actions. More or less, it'll be pretty similar to that, but it's also good to kind of think these through, particularly because if you just kind of generate one of these, then you get into a situation where like one architect could edit another's profile, and it's easy to create permission restrictions on things like that, but sometimes it's a good idea to just kind of do it all very explicitly, so you like if I don't make an edit and an update, then there's no way for the wrong people to get into them, right? So on the other hand, those are actually the ones that I'm going to make right now because I want an architect to be able to edit their yeah, their profile. So
Yeah. Super important feature.
edit HTML.
Maybe I'll make the next one.
Okay.
If you want me to do the update one, I can try.
First name. Oh, that's got to be a text field.
Now, Mike, when you say give it the underscore text field, Ruby understands these parameters. Where are you? I mean, these not. Ruby understands this description that you're giving. Do you get that on the Rails guides?
Yes.
F dot field. So if you wanted to put a number in there instead, would it be?
It's a number field.
Number field. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a number field is in HTML. It's very similar to a text field.
Yes.
So a lot of browsers will treat it as the same thing. Job title. Business address. Okay, so this is basically the minimal. It's not exactly a usable form. Okay, and this is a technique that we can use to make sure that people only edit their own profiles, as opposed to this approach where you are actually editing and it's using this method before it runs edit, it runs set block, and set block uses one of the parameters that you pass in from the browser to choose which thing you're editing. But in this case, we are using the session data about who is logged in to choose, and that is a pretty good way to enforce that people can only edit their own information. And then here we're going to do something similar. And in this case, we are going to use the Rails paradigm of how to
Yes.
make sure that the things being edited are the ones we want. Like for example, we're going to store a field on Architect called Stripe customer ID. We don't want people to update that. Only us will update that. So we're going to permit them to update their first name, their last name, their business name, their job title, their phone number, business address, and we might also allow them to update their email, but we will worry about that later.
Protected blocks. Block pronouns.
And then for now, we can just redirect them back to the home page after they finish their update.
Why wouldn't we go back to their profile? Just to confirm their profile.
We could go back to their profile, but yeah, we could totally. We'll make the profile right after we confirm that this is working well enough.
We don't have that view yet. Okay.
Yeah, okay, so right. The first thing we need is a link to this. So let's go back to that little spot where we were creating some links, the narthex, and we can say edit profile. Edit architect path, current, well, okay, so this is an interesting interaction here because the normal routes that we would have for accessing a RESTful controller are going to assume that, like if I said this, resources architects, then that's going to generate routes including edit, update, all the stuff that I want. The edit function there is the edit route is only going to work if we pass it an ID as though that were the ID of what we're going to edit. Of course, it's not necessarily because we're only going to edit the person who's logged in. And we don't therefore need to specify the ID in order for it to work. But just because that's the way the route is drawn, as it were, I think we're going to take the path of least resistance and say just pass it an ID, even though that's actually not going to affect the way it works. The other thing to be prepared for is that these two sets of routes might interact with each other. Because routes are kind of defined to match things in a pretty open-ended way. So there might be a route that we think is going to go to one thing, but it actually happens to match one of the others. I think that if I put devise before resources, that's the best way to make sure that the routes I need are kind of all accessible and functional. We'll have to see if that works for me. Yeah, because this registration controller, it's doing a lot of the things that my RESTful controller would do. So it's gobbling up some of the, and actually even here, see here, okay, so here I have the concept of editing something where I give it the ID. Here it has the concept of editing yourself, so you don't need the ID. So an alternative to what we're doing would be to just edit the template that devise is going to display when somebody goes to this path. And then rather than edit architect path, I would just say edit architect registration path. I like this route, this technique for now because I think it will give us a slightly more straightforward way to control all elements of the process. Like if we want to add logic to this part in the controller, I mean, there are advantages to this because it has kind of thought through a bunch of complicated scenarios for authentication management, but as I said, we're going to go the path of least resistance for the time being. And this form wouldn't really be usable without labels to tell me what all these fields are. So I'll go ahead and fill that in.
Would these be inside the field?
That's a good question. If you want the type of labels that are inside the field, that is accomplished by
CSS.
it's actually accomplished by an HTML5 attribute called placeholder.
Okay.
So I could say like that. And that, that probably is actually a more professional way to present this interface. So thank you for bringing it up. So I can now come in here. I can go to Edit Profile. And you can see this one has the thing which is there. And once I start typing, it goes away. Once I erase things, it comes back. So that's a good one. It's a really good one, actually. There is a question of, like, is this supported on all browsers? And the answer is probably no. Internet Explorer, going back a few years, probably would have trouble with this. And since our clientele is at risk of being in that camp, we need to be aware. But on the other hand, architects, more than anyone else in the world, they love this kind of sexy design and sort of like functional, like get out of the wayness. So there's that. There is actually a nice little JavaScript library that will detect when a browser cannot handle this attribute. So this is just HTML.
Yes.
It says right here, placeholder right within the tag. So there's no JavaScript functioning right now. But there is a library called placeholder or whatever that will detect when a browser is too old to handle that, and it will use JavaScript to place it in there, to hide it, and intelligently show it again and stuff. So that's an option too. But for now, I'm going to say my name is Michael Schwab. My phone number is 555-2233. Nope, that's not right. 223-1800. My business name is Holistic Buildings. Holdings? No, I like making jokes, but it's also good to keep it down below your highest level of humor. My job title is architect, and my business address is 350 First Avenue, Suite PH. Brooklyn, New York, 10028. There we go. And rather,
we'll have to filter those. You know.
okay, undefined local variable or method architect params, because when I copied this method from blocks controller, I forgot to rename it, so I'm going to say architect.
Of course, I knew it was something.
And I can now just use the browser to resubmit this. Okay, so when you are testing your application and you make a request and it fails, and then you fix the code, there are some cases where you can just resubmit the request and it will work. There are other cases where you have to kind of take other things into consideration about what happened between the time that the request began and the error happened. This is kind of a nuanced thing that you will learn over time, and you know, as you're starting out, there are certain things that you will be aware of and certain things that you just haven't learned yet. So sometimes it's good to actually rewind, erase. Sometimes you actually want to jump into the console and delete the data that you created the first time around if it's incomplete or invalid or just there's something that you forgot. But in this case, I'm pretty sure that I can just use the browser to resend the form and it will do what I want. Okay. So again, I forgot to update the lingo within this method. And again, the failure happened early enough that it didn't yet touch the database. So I think it's pretty much completely safe to do that. And Safari, of course, asks you twice if you want to resend it for no reason. And now if I click this, I'll see that my data is actually here. So that's Rails helping me out. Okay, so because I wrote form for architect, and then I passed this, this method has something to pass into the block, which I then call other methods on that. Because of those three things, the data that is already stored in this object gets populated into these fields, okay? And also because of this convention, it knows to use the root for update. So I didn't have to write update, but it already knew that it was going to this method. So that's a useful convention because you can use the same form and it says like if this is a new guy, we'll go to create. If this is an existing guy, we'll go to update. But since we were using devise for registration, we don't need to worry about the new half of things right now.
What I think is helpful in the update is the profiles is for you to put their current data, you know. So maybe in those placeholders you can say,
That's what it does.
oh, it did?
That's my current data. And now if I want to update this to like
That's cool. I didn't realize
this,
that. Yeah.
and so instead of update architect, that should say update my profile. Update my profile information. And it should be on a new line.
Oh, should we have more than one line for the address?
Maybe. Maybe we should. But we're not going to be actually mailing these people anything. This is just for them to feel like big shots.
Sure, we got it. Yeah, I don't think we're mailing things.
Look how big my address is. Penthouse, baby. vanity address. My home is actually on 20th Street, but I use my vanity address. Okay, so that satisfies that one. Okay, now into the actual functionality. Architect can search for an address. All right, let's circle back and commit some of this code. Whoops.
Did we do DB migrate?
Yeah, we did. We added this table, those indexes. Cool, some empty specs there. Okay, so architect, sign up, login, profile. So now what we're doing is architect can search for an address. Okay, so let's go ahead and tie in our style sheet foundation rails.
All right. You wanna pause the video for this one? You could start this with another one.
Okay. Yeah, we'll start another video.